Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Qurtuba Convention Centre near Sandton in Johannesburg. We are for the Banking Association of South Africa's annual Islamic Banking Conference. It's promising to be a very interesting day with a whole lot of speakers, CEOs speaking about the future of Islamic banking in South Africa. Let's take a look of what's going to be happening inside.
I'm Yasin Lockett from the Banking Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 Islamic Banking Conference as your MC. So maybe to get into it, our theme this year is adoption of fintech and collaboration in positioning Islamic banking for the future. This thought-provoking and insightful theme speaks to the growing importance of digital innovation and the journey of Islamic banking in the evolving financial landscape. Before we begin, I would like to call upon Mufti Vauda to open with a dua.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. I seek protection in Allah from Shaitan, the rejected one. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most compassionate, the most merciful. أَمَّنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَأَنزَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَنبَتْنَا بِهِ حَدَائِقَ ذَاتَ بَهْجَةٍ ما كان لكم أن تنبتوا شجرها أإله مع الله بل هم قوم يعدلون. Is not He, Allah, the best who created the heavens and the earth and sendeth down for you water from the sky, wherewith we cause to spring forth joyous orchards, whose trees it never hath been yours to cause to grow? Is there any deity besides Allah? Nay, but they are folk who ascribe equals unto Him. أَمَّنْ جَعَلَ الْأَرْضَ قَرَارًا وَجَعَلَ خِلَالَهَا أَنْهَارًا وَجَعَلَ لَهَا رَوَاسِي. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has declared the truth.
Jazakallah Mufti Vauda for that beautiful recitation.
I'm now delighted to be joined by Ms. Bongi Kuneni, the MD of the Banking Association of South Africa, BASA. Ms. Kuneni, thank you so much for joining me on INX Prime.
Thank you very much. It's a good opportunity for us as BASA to be here hosting this conference today.
Before we get into today's conference, tell me more about the Banking Association of South Africa, some of the work it does, and the role it plays within the broader spectrum of banking in the country.
So BASA is a collaborative platform. It's where all the banks come with issues relating to the banking industry, and we solve those issues in a non-competitive manner. So whether it's an issue about regulations or an issue about new laws, it doesn't matter. As long as it's got an impact on how banking is conducted in South Africa, we get together and solve for that.
You mentioned collaboration, and we see today's event is a collaboration between the major banks in South Africa, some of the big four, as well as smaller banks, standalone banks when it comes to Islamic banking. Why is it so important to have these conferences to bring the industry players together?
It's important on a number of levels. The first one, benchmarking. You always want to know that what you are doing, the people you compete against are doing the same thing, because basically you don't want any of the banks that have got an Islamic finance window to be left behind. So benchmarking is the first prize of this conference. The second one is to talk about issues of regulation. Regulation touches on every bank. It's the same regulator, the South African Reserve Bank, and in its regulation of the Islamic banking section of what we do as bankers, we want a standardized approach so that there isn't regulation which proportionally or disproportionately affect one bank over the other. Maybe the last one, because there are so many reasons to collaborate, the last one that I would say is also to check on international developments and trends. In terms of international developments, South Africa is not the oldest jurisdiction when it comes to banking that is Sharia compliant. So we use this platform to learn from each other.
I think it's very important that the collaboration happens. My final question to you is, how can BASA and how is BASA assisting in taking Islamic banking or Sharia compliant banking to the next level within South Africa and beyond?
So last year, we were very focused in our conversations on education. We are still very much about we need to disseminate information of what Islamic finance can do and how good it is for South African corporates, for South African families, irrespective of the religious background. This year, taking the Islamic finance story outside of South Africa is my next preoccupation. One of the areas we are looking at is to understand what other associations do when it comes to Islamic finance. The first association where we are collaborating with that, and we are going to have an MOU that would underpin what we do together. It's with it's the Union of Arabic Banks. Probably by next year, we'll have more to say about that, but it's in the works because we want what we do not only to be a South African story, we want it to be an African story and eventually to be an international story.
Skulani, thank you so much for your time. I think it's very interesting, challenging, and exciting times for the Islamic banking industry in South Africa and throughout the world. I'm now joined by Aman Mohammed, the CEO of FNB Islamic Banking. Aman, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to iNext Prime.
Walaikum salam, Mohammed. Nice to see you again.
Aman, you're going to be one of the presenters and you're going to be also moderating some of the sessions today. Before we go into it, how important is having this conference and bringing Islamic banking into the fold?
Mohammed, there are a number of issues that we're going to touch on in the conference today, but I think one of the important points that I will be moderating in my session this morning is on Islamic liquidity management solutions. This is a topic that Islamic banks around the world are struggling with. And in South Africa, we're looking at innovative solutions in terms of how we counter the problem that we're facing as far as Islamic liquidity management solutions are concerned. It also covers the entire gambit of Islamic capital markets.
For the benefit of our viewers out there, what does Islamic liquidity management solutions actually mean? It's a lot of words, so briefly explain to us what it means.
Mohammed, it's the pieces that the customer never gets to see. It's the stuff that happens in the back end. It's the treasury management of the money that Islamic banks collect. So you would have heard a big noise about the recent sukuk that was issued by government. So what we want to do is we want to explore the importance of the issuance of that sukuk to assist banks in managing excess flows of deposits. So Islamic banks are able to deploy those funds in a manner that can generate Sharia compliant profits so customers can enjoy the benefits that they earn on top of the deposit that they make with an Islamic bank.
So if I understand correctly, with Islamic banking, it's very different to traditional banking where the money is invested into because of the Sharia compliance of where the money needs to go to.
Mohammed, it's exactly the point that we always talk about. In lieu of earning interest, we need to earn a profit share. So we want to debate and talk about all the different avenues that banks can utilize to earn profit share as opposed to interest.
There's always a confusion between the profit and interest. How do you differentiate between the two?
Mohammed, it's quite straightforward. Definitely in the bank that I represent, and I know with many of my colleagues that will be on stage with us today, we have an element where all Islamic funds are completely ring-fenced and kept separate from conventional funds. And these funds are then utilized to generate a profit as opposed to earning interest. So, some people make a sarcastic comment that, oh, it's just another name for interest. But in reality, Mohammed, we're going to delve into, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully the audience will learn a hell of a lot more in terms of how profit is generated as opposed to just a passive earning of interest.
Aman, thank you so much. And I think it's very important that you mentioned that a lot of people do make the comment that it's just interest in another name. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was Aman Mohammed, the CEO of FNB Islamic Banking, speaking about the topics he'll be discussing. And I think it's really important that we pay attention to this. And it's a very, very important topic that will be discussed. And you'll catch highlights of it during the course of tonight's broadcast.
What I wanted to do is just continue the discussion from last year, where we started off a piece of work of understanding what the regulatory environment is and what the scope of improvements could be. So we began the discussion last year and we presented our findings, our initial findings, which included that we could not find a single source of truth for definitions. And we'll expand on that during the course of this presentation. We then continued from last year to this year to study the legislation and how each of the pieces of legislation interact with each other. And what we're presenting today is just a progress report. It's a work in progress. In the background of this presentation runs a technical document, which hopefully we try and complete by the end of this year, and then submit with Bas's assistance to the legislator and the regulators, hopefully with success. Importantly, we need to understand how the legislation evolved. It started off in 2010 with the taxation amendment laws of 2010, and I think this was possibly the most significant change that was effected. And what happened here was National Treasury issued the bill, which amongst other things, it contained the first major inclusion of Islamic finance into the different pieces of legislation. And three main constructs were included: Murabaha, Mudaraba, and diminishing Musharaka. In 2011, there was the inclusion of the definition of sukuk in the Amendment Bill of 2011. In 2012, this amendment sought to provide for ijara muntahina bit tamlik, but it didn't explicitly define it. It created in Section 1 of the VAT Act an expansion of what a credit agreement is, and that's about it. But it didn't explicitly define ijara, and we'll expand on that. In 2014, it created the exemption for sukuk. The exemption for sukuk was, it clarified that the issue of the sukuk and the relationship with the SPV, the manner in which the sukuk legislation has been created was, sukuk has to be issued through a formal trust. Like, you have to set up an actual trust, although from a Sharia perspective, that SPV could be any legal entity in form. It doesn't have to be in the form of a trust. It could serve in the form of a PTY limited.
So as we know, Islamic banking operates with a unique set of principles, right, where we adhere to the requirements of Sharia, and then we operate within our regulatory landscape within South Africa specifically. So I have a few questions, and I'd like to have it conversational where we unpack some of these items that you've mentioned, right? And I think perhaps as a start, I'm going to turn to Aman. So Aman, as Amin has articulated, and I think in his first slide, he spoke about the evolution from the regulatory landscape in terms of Islam, or rather to enable Islamic banking. So we heard about the evolution. So in your assessment, how much progress has already been made, and how does this currently enable the industry?
Thank you, Shaheen. In order for us to fully appreciate all the work that Amin has done, we really need to go back to even the days before Al Baraka had started. Islamic banking in South Africa is largely a self-regulated industry. Now, understand me correctly here. First and foremost, we operate as banks, so we are required to follow the regulation and the legislation as is required for any bank that is set up in South Africa. Furthermore, we realized as the industry progressed, and we'll talk a little bit about it, I suppose, during the course of this conversation, that further, let's put it in the form of guidance, was required from the regulatory authorities and the legislative authorities. Fast forward to the Islamic Banking, or the Banking Association's Islamic Banking Subcommittee, interacting with the South African Reserve Bank in the days of the Banking Supervision Department, where the question was posed, do we require specific regulations? And at the time, the response that we received was that we regulate the banks on a risk-based structure according to the Basel requirements. And one of the points that we had raised specifically from a governance perspective and a fit and proper requirement was to then talk to FISCA specifically regarding market conduct and the fit and proper requirements of Sharia scholars and people working within the Islamic banking industry. Now, Shane, if we just pause for a moment and look at other countries in Africa, two notable exceptions, Nigeria and Zambia, have actually introduced specific Islamic banking regulations for the banks that offer Islamic banking services and the standalone Islamic banks. Now, one of the points that I'm just going to make in favor of consideration for specific Islamic banking regulations is the actual protection of the industry.
On that basis, we had a number of, when SARS inspections took place at clients, or there was a requirement from the auditors, they actually came and questioned the nature of the transactions. Should we tax it upfront? Should we do this? Should we do that? And we had standard responses available to refer them to certain practice notes, etc., that apply to 2010. So I think when you talk about standardization, when the task team was established leading to the legislation change in 2010, there was a lot of interaction at National Treasury. There was groups that were set up, people attended, and arising from that, for the first time in 2010, things were formalized. So I think the standardization is definitely required. The impetus hasn't really, or the momentum hasn't continued from that point in time. So I think it was just in 2010, and the reason for that, I should say, is because of the big banks coming into Islamic banking. Because prior to that, there was just one bank. It was small. It operated, wasn't a major risk to the fiscus. But when the bigger banks came in, then they were actually forced to do those consultations, etc., and that speared the way for that whole process.
One of the things that I omitted as well in terms of the sukuk, which would be interesting for the audience as well, is who can benefit from the sukuk in terms of its HQLA status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think there was the Prudential Authority issued a notice to say that the National Treasury is issuing a sukuk, and they put a qualifying criteria that yes, as a bank, you can consume the sukuk, but in order for it to qualify as HQLA instrument, you need to meet this criteria, which is it has to cover the outflows of your Sharia deposits, etc. So I think that's also a piece of, in reference to sukuk, sorry, and my intention is not to dismiss the question. It's merely just to defer it to the session that we're having later. We need to get that notice from the Prudential Authority amended, because if we, as it stands right now, it restricts the appetite from banks to actually consume the sukuk, because I'm using an example, a bank that doesn't have a window operation today may not consume it, a Capitec, as an example, that doesn't have any, or an African bank or Discovery, they don't have it, but if they can use it as another tool in the HQLA portfolio, if we widen that, and that would then widen our investor base.
I'm delighted to be joined now by Shaheen Suleiman, the head of Islamic Banking at APSA. Shaheen, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to INX.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shaheen, a very successful conference. I think the turnout was good. What are your takeouts from today?
So, Mohammed, a phenomenal conference. I think, as you pointed out, the turnout was great, which shows the interest in the Islamic banking industry. We spoke about quite a few interesting topics as well, and hopefully this will be the catalyst for us to be able to start implementing some of the changes that we've spoken about, and also continue growing Islamic banking.
We know BASA play a big role within the regulatory framework. How important is it to have the buy-in from the Banking Association from South Africa as you guys aim to grow Islamic banking?
So BASA plays a very important role. Remember, through BASA, which is a banking association of South Africa, all of the banks come together and form that central platform where we can discuss issues that impact Islamic banking, impact our customers. We focus a lot today on regulation, legislation, amendments required, challenges, etc. But we also focus on a lot of the positive elements that's already prevalent within Islamic banking. So most definitely the forum that BASA creates for us is one that where we can collaborate together as Islamic banks and serve our customer base in the industry as a whole.
Final question to you. Are you excited about the future of Islamic banking in South Africa and also moving maybe into sub-Saharan Africa?
Most definitely. So as APSA, we already operate in quite a few African countries. We offer Islamic banking in quite a few of those African countries already. But I think from a South African perspective, there's so much of opportunity within the South African context that we're looking forward to making sure that we provide more and more solutions for Islamic banking customers.
Shaheen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mohammed.
It was Shaheen Suleiman, the head of Islamic Banking at APSA. And now we've come to the end of the 2024 Islamic Banking Conference brought to you by the Banking Association of South Africa. And to conclude, I'm delighted to be joined by Amin Hassan, the head of Sharia Banking at Standard Bank. Amin, assalamu alaikum. Welcome back.
Assalamu rahmatullah, Muhammad. Thanks for having me.
Amin, so it's the end of the conference. What's your take on today's events?
I think it was a great opportunity for us as an industry to take stock of the progresses that we made. And sometimes we forget all the good work that we actually do. So it was good to see. We closed off with Aman, chairman of the Association of Islamic Financial Service Providers, giving us an overview of the nominal values of the industry. And when you actually see what that comes out to, I think very quickly you get to trillions. So it's good to see the progress that we've made. It's also good for us to know what we still need to do, ensure that we still headed towards our true north. And importantly, I want to convey a message on behalf of the industry to our regulators. The support that we get from BASA is, yes, we're saying that we need a lot of help on regulation, and it's a hindrance, but it doesn't mean in any way or form that we're complaining. It doesn't mean that we see our regulators in any negative light. It's just us saying, listen, this is what we need to aid our growth.
You mentioned Aman's conclusion, the concluding slides he put out, and you can see the future of Islamic banking in South Africa. We've seen the growth over the last 35 years or so. Are you confident, as one of the practitioners within this field, that it can actually grow even more in the next few years?
Mohammed, you know, there's a theory that is there in new product development, and the theory is called crossing the chasm. And what you have in this theory is essentially you've got a small amount of client in the initial stages of a new product or a new offering, and they call the early adopters.
As always, very important points put forward. And until we see you again,
Inshallah.
We'll see you on the channel in a few days, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
That was Amin Hassan, the head of Sharia Banking at Standard Bank. And to our viewers out there, we've come to the end of this broadcast. We hope you enjoyed it. I think it was a really interesting, important conversations that were had here at the Banking Association Islamic Banking Conference. Until we meet again, fi amanillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.